while Operation Epic Fury consumes $1 billion daily, an amount that could fully fund SNAP benefits for 40 million Americans for an entire month. The federal government is slashing domestic safety nets to manage a $37 trillion national debt. The removal of categorical eligibility has already stripped 6 million citizens of their food security, effectively trading household nutrition for geopolitical dominance. Every 24 hours, the Middle East conflict continues. The U.S. burns through the equivalent of a national monthly food budget. In states like Mississippi and New Mexico, these cuts have triggered a localized hunger crisis, proving that this isn't just a policy shift. It is a direct transfer of wealth from American kitchens to global battlefields. From apartments to asphalt. In 2026, the American dream is rapidly transforming into a struggle for survival as the working homeless become the new face of a national crisis. Across the 50 states, a dangerous intersection of $7 gasoline and record-high urban rents has created a reality where a full-time paycheck no longer guarantees a front door. This shift from apartments to asphalt is being accelerated by a surgical strike on the federal budget, the removal of categorical eligibility. By stripping away this critical regulatory buffer, the government has effectively disqualified millions of families who sit just a few dollars above the federal poverty line. For a family in transition, losing a $200 monthly SNAP benefit isn't just a grocery problem. It is the exact amount that you use to cover the gap between paying a utility bill and making the rent. Without this food security, the precarious balance collapses, pushing thousands of employed Americans into tents and vehicles while they continue to report to work every morning. The school lunch crisis. This domestic erosion deepens with a quiet budget cut, a policy shift that has left nearly 2 million children behind in the shadows of the 2026 conflict. According to recent USDA data, the redirection of federal funds toward international military mandates has forced the cancellation of universal school meals in once resilient states like California and Maine. This isn't merely a statistical adjustment. It is an immediate physical impact on the next generation. As school districts lose the federal subsidies that allow for free lunches regardless of income, the school lunch crisis has returned with a vengeance. For these children, the war in the Middle East isn't a distant headline on a screen. It is a tangible, persistent growl in their stomachs during a math lesson. By choosing to prioritize $41 million in hourly war spending over nutrition of 2 million students, the 2026 budget has effectively traded long-term domestic health for short-term geopolitical dominance, leaving the most vulnerable Americans to pay the highest price. Geography of hunger. As a massive federal budget cliff begins to disproportionately dismantle the stability of specific American regions, while the global conflict in the Middle East captures the headlines, the most devastating frontline is appearing on a survival map of 5 states currently facing an unprecedented nutrition crisis. Leading this list are Mississippi and West Virginia, states where poverty has long been a systemic shadow. Unlike wealthier coastal neighbors, these regions possess zero state-level backup funds to bridge the gap left by the $4.5 billion federal SNAP reduction. In Mississippi, where nearly 15% of households rely on food assistance, the loss of categorical eligibility means that a single overtime shift could result in a total loss of benefits, leaving families stranded in an economic no-man's land. West Virginia faces a similar collapse as rural grocery stores, the anchors of local economies, anticipate a 20% drop in revenue, potentially leading to widespread closures in areas already struggling with access. The map of 2026 instability extends into New Mexico, where massive rural food deserts are becoming even more dangerous. As federal transportation subsidies for food distribution are redirected toward military logistics, the cost of moving fresh produce to remote tribal lands and desert communities has skyrocketed. For residents in these areas, the 2026 war isn't a theoretical conflict. It is a physical barrier to the next meal. Similarly, Louisiana is grappling with the disappearance of its federal safety nets just as it began recovering from significant domestic economic shifts. The state's unique dependence on maritime and energy jobs makes it highly sensitive to global shocks, and the sudden removal of food aid has turned a Big Easy into a city of hard choices. The message for those living in these states is clear. The geopolitical decisions made in Washington have a direct, localized impact on the kitchen tables of the industrial South and the rural West. Who are we protecting? This brings a nation to the center of the 2026 defense versus diet debate, exposing profound identity crisis within the American economy. The central irony is impossible to ignore. The United States is currently spending $1 billion a day to project power and ensure global security, yet its own domestic security is visibly crumbling. As the national debt surges toward an astronomical $37 trillion, the fiscal priorities of the government have become increasingly disconnected from the reality of its citizens. A nation that can authorize the launch of a $2 million Tomahawk missile without hesitation, but debates the merits of a $2 school lunch, is a nation struggling with its own moral compass. The human cost of this divergence is perhaps most visibly captured by the sight of a military veteran standing in a 2-hour food bank line in Ohio or Georgia. These men and women, who once protected the country's interests abroad, now find themselves casualties of a budget that prioritizes hardware over humanity. In 2026, the question of who are we protecting has moved from a philosophical debate to an urgent survival concern for millions of American families. The arithmetic of the empty plate. The year 2026 has introduced a haunting new equation into the American consciousness, a calculation now recognized as the arithmetic of the empty plate. As the federal government maintains a staggering $1 billion daily burn rate on Operation Epic Fury, the fiscal trade-offs have moved from abstract policy to the dinner tables of 40 million Americans. To put this into perspective, the capital required to sustain 24 hours of military engagement in the Middle East is the exact sum needed to fund the entire Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for a full month. This means that for every day the conflict continues, the nation effectively incinerates 30 days of food security for its most vulnerable citizens. With the national debt now exceeding $37 trillion, this one-to-one ratio between a day of warfare and a month of domestic nourishment has become the defining metric of the 2026 financial crisis. The logic of this math of misery is as cold as it is devastating. By prioritizing the billion-dollar daily expenditure on naval blockades and precision strikes, the federal budget has undergone a surgical extraction of social safety nets. The recent USDA data confirms that the removal of categorical eligibility was a direct result of this resource diversion, a move intended to offset the $41 million hourly cost of the war. For the 40 million Americans who rely on SNAP, this policy shift represents a systemic collapse of the safety net that once guarded against sudden economic shocks. As the 2026 conflict enters its second month, the cumulative cost has already surpassed the annual budget for several key domestic infrastructure programs. This creates a zero-sum reality where geopolitical dominance is purchased at the cost of domestic stability, proving that in 2026, the most expensive weapon in the American arsenal is the food aid that is no longer being delivered to the 50 states. Surviving the aid cut. The realization that federal support is vanishing in 2026 can be paralyzing, but for the 6 million Americans currently facing an aid cliff, the first step toward survival is understanding that they are not alone. As the 2026 budget shift redirects billions toward international military hardware, the domestic landscape is fractured, leaving families to navigate a complex new world of decentralized support. Strategic survival in this era begins with tapping into mutual aid networks, which have seen a 40% increase in activity since the February escalations. Unlike traditional charities, these neighbor-led organizations operate on the principle of solidarity rather than charity, often providing groceries, transportation, and even emergency cash without the bureaucratic red tape of federal systems. In states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, digital mutual aid maps have become essential tools for those disqualified by the new federal asset tests, allowing them to find local support within minutes of their own front door. Complementing these networks is the rise of community fridges, freestanding, volunteer-run units that provide 24/7 access to fresh produce and dairy. In 2026, these fridges have become the neighborhood pantries of the industrial North and the urban South, filling the gap left by overwhelmed traditional food banks. For a family in a bust state like Nevada or Florida, these resources offer a dignified way to supplement a dwindling pantry without the stigma of long lines. Furthermore, For those who have been recently disqualified from SNAP due to the 2026 categorical eligibility changes, there is a technical path for recourse. Many are unaware that they can formally appeal the USDA asset test if their household vehicle or modest savings was used as the primary disqualifier. Recent 2026 data indicates that approximately 12% of appeals are successful when households can demonstrate that their assets are illiquid or essential for work transportation, offering a small but vital sliver of hope in a tightening fiscal environment. The divergence between global war spending and domestic hunger has reached a breaking point, and the data suggests that the food war trade-off will define the remainder of the 2026 fiscal year. While the federal government continues to authorize $1 billion per day for Operation Epic Fury, the real-time impact is being documented not in press briefings, but in the comment sections of local news and community forums. At this moment, we are turning the camera back toward you, the viewer, to get the truth from the ground. We want to know, have you or someone in your community lost SNAP benefits in the last 30 days? What do the lines look like at your local food bank in Ohio, Georgia, or California? Is the billion-dollar choice visible on your local grocery shelves? By sharing your state and your specific experience below, you are helping us build a real-time map of the 2026 crisis that the national media often ignores. Your data is the most powerful tool we have for documenting the true human cost of this era. The 2026 war is being paid for in American kitchens, and the landscape of our 50 states is being permanently altered by the decisions made in Washington. At our 50 states, our guiding principle is that every citizen deserves access to raw, unvarnished data, even when that data is difficult to process. As the national debt surges toward $37 trillion and the conflict in the Middle East shows no signs of cooling, the domestic safety net will continue to be a primary casualty. To stay ahead of these budget shifts and understand how the next wave of federal cuts will affect your specific region, make sure to subscribe and join our community of informed citizens. We will continue to track the migration of wealth from our neighborhoods to the front lines, ensuring you have the information needed to protect your family and your future. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and above all, look out for one another as we navigate this historic economic split together.